The end of Viridia did not come with a bang, but with a whisper that faded into absolute silence. It was a cessation, a grand and terrible stopping. One moment, the colony was the vibrant heart of humanity's expansion, a world where terraforming engines hummed in harmony with orchestras and the raw, red canyons echoed with the laughter of children painting murals on their habitat walls. The next, it was a museum of living statues. The attack was not on their bodies, but on their souls. Dr. Eris Thorne was the first to know, long before the rescue fleets arrived to find a population of 2 million people breathing, eating, and staring with placid, empty eyes. He was the chief architect of the Viridian Neural Chorus, a colony-wide psionic network designed to share art, music, and communal emotion, a testament to humanity's most hopeful ideals. He was on a relay station orbiting a gas giant 3 light weeks away, running a diagnostic. When the wave hit, it registered on his console not as an energy spike or a data breach, but as a void. He watched the real-time emotional telemetry of 2 million souls, a vibrant, chaotic symphony of joy, anxiety, love, and creativity suddenly flatten into a single monotonous drone. It was the color of static, the sound of nothing, the last thing he ever received from Viridia, from the world where his wife, Lena, was sculpting nebulae from light, and his daughter, Ilara, was learning her first song, was a single, cascading fragment of data. It was not a word or an image, but the raw, decoded sensation of pure, uncomprehending terror, followed by an even more horrifying feeling, the peaceful acceptance of being hollowed out. Then, nothing. The silence swallowed them whole, and for Eris Thorne, the universe ended. The months that followed were a blur of cold fury and colder coffee. While the United Terran Mandate scrambled its fleets and diplomats demanded answers from an empty sky, Eris locked himself in a sensory deprivation chamber with the last picosecond of Viridia's data. The official reports were useless, concluding a new form of mimetic virus or a neurotoxin. But Eris knew better. This was too clean, too precise. He submerged himself in the ghost of that final transmission, letting the terror and the void wash over him again and again, searching for the signature of the artist who had painted this monstrous masterpiece. Humanity raged, demanding a target for its anger, but there was no wreckage, no enemy fleet, only a planet of beautifully crafted porcelain dolls that had once been people. The military, under the grim and pragmatic command of Marshal Eva Rostova, began assembling the largest armada in human history, a behemoth of steel and plasma ready to burn a path to whoever was responsible. They were preparing for a war of attrition, a war of planets and fleets. Eris knew it would be like trying to kill the ocean with a sword. Finally, after weeks of sleepless obsession, he found it. Buried deep within the resonant frequency that had silenced his family was a signature, an impossibly ancient and complex signal that was less a communication and more a declaration of cosmic principle. It was elegant, mathematical, and utterly devoid of malice. It was the signal of a gardener pruning a weed. He cross-referenced the frequency with deep space astronomical archives, tracing its faint echoes back through millennia to a civilization cataloged only as a theoretical K-Type 3 intelligence, the Glyptons. They had never communicated, never shown themselves. They were simply a ghost in the machine of the cosmos. But their signature was now burned into his mind. They weren't conquerors. They were curators. They saw humanity's chaotic, unpredictable, passionate nature, our art, our fury, our love as a flaw, a discordant note in the grand, silent symphony of the universe. Viridia hadn't been an act of war, it was an act of celestial editing. Eris emerged from his chamber, thin and haunted, and requested an immediate audience with Marshal Rostova. He walked into the war room aboard the Mandate flagship, Unbroken Vow, a place humming with the controlled energy of imminent, overwhelming violence. Holographic displays showed fleet deployments and weapons yields. Generals spoke of kinetic kill vehicles and planetary glassing. They were sharpening a knife for a fistfight. And Aris was there to tell them they were facing a god. Rostova was a woman carved from granite, her face a mask of stern control that barely concealed the immense pressure she was under. She looked at Eris, a scientist clutching a data slate, with undisguised impatience. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice clipped. "I was told this was a matter of extreme urgency. We are mobilizing for the greatest war in our history. I hope you have more than a theory." Eris didn't flinch. He projected his findings onto the main display, replacing the images of warships with the chilling, fractal elegance of the Glypton signal. "You are preparing the wrong war, Marshal," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "You want to throw rocks at a tsunami. You cannot kill the Glyptons with rail guns and nuclear warheads. That is like trying to cure a disease by screaming at it. They don't value territory. They don't value resources. They value order, perfection, silence. To them, we are a noisy, messy aberration, and they just tried to quiet us down." A general scoffed. "So, we quiet them down. Permanently." Eris shook his head, a ghost of a bitter smile on his lips. "They've likely been watching civilizations rise and fall since before our ancestors discovered fire. Your fleet is a momentary annoyance to them. If we attack them with fire and steel, they will simply erase us, just as they did Viridia. But this time, they won't leave the bodies behind. To fight them, to hurt them, we cannot attack what they have. We must attack what they are." He took a deep breath, the next words feeling like sacrilege on his tongue. "They tried to take our soul, our capacity for emotion, for art, for love, for rage. I propose we give it to them, all of it." He brought up a new schematic, a design of impossible complexity that looked less like a weapon and more like a cathedral dedicated to a mad god. "I call it the Echo Chamber. It is a psycho-reactive amplifier on a colossal scale. It will link to the neural cores of every man, woman, and child in the Mandate who is willing. It will harness the one thing we have in infinite supply right now, our grief, our rage, our pain over Viridia. It will take that raw, chaotic, human agony and focus it into a coherent wave. A psychic spear forged from our collective sorrow." The room was silent. The generals stared, their bravado replaced by a dawning horror. Rostova's eyes narrowed, drilling into Eris. "You want to weaponize grief. They attacked our very essence, Marshal," Eris countered, his voice rising with a passion he thought he'd lost. "So, we will make our essence a weapon. We will build a ghost fleet, not of dreadnoughts, but of psychic amplifiers. We will sail to their worlds, and we will show them what it feels like to lose everything. We will not break their ships. We will break their minds. We will drown them in the chaos they so despise. We will make them feel." The debate that followed was brief and brutal. It was monstrous. It was an atrocity. It was a weapon that would forever change what it meant to be human. But as Rostova looked at the Glypton signal, at its calm, serene, mathematical perfection, and then at the live feed from Viridia showing a little girl with Alara's haircut, sitting and staring at a wall, her paintbrush lying forgotten in the dust. The cold pragmatism that had defined her career won out. Extinction was an absolute. Becoming a monster was a choice, but it was a choice that allowed for survival. "Build it," she commanded, her voice barely a whisper. "Build your ghost fleet, Doctor, and may God have mercy on all our souls." 6 months later, the fleet was ready. It was an armada of ghosts, its ships bristling not with cannons, but with shimmering, resonant spires that pulsed with a faint, sorrowful light. At its heart was the flagship Mnemosyne, the vessel that housed the echo chamber, and at the heart of the chamber was Eris Thorn, his body connected by 1,000 shimmering threads of light to the weapon he had conceived in his grief. He was no longer just a man, he was the focus, the lens through which the pain of billions would be directed. He could feel it all, the anger of soldiers, the despair of families, the aching, hollow loss of an entire civilization for its silenced colony. It was an agony that threatened to tear him apart, but his own personal loss was the anchor, the cold, hard diamond of pain around which the storm coalesced. Rostova stood on the bridge, watching him, her face unreadable. Their first target had been chosen with a cruelty that was itself a part of the weapon. They were not aiming for a military outpost or an industrial hub. They were going to Xylos, a Glypton archive world. It was not a planet of Glyptons, but a living museum, a curated garden containing the last living specimens of countless species the Glyptons had perfected over the eons, civilizations silenced just like Viridia. Their final order generations preserved forever in a state of tranquil purity. It was the ultimate monument to their philosophy, and it was about to become the galaxy's first testament to human sorrow. "Jump," Rostova ordered. The universe twisted, and the ghost fleet vanished from Terran space. They emerged into the serene, multi-hued light of the Xylos system. The planet below was a masterpiece, a perfect world where creatures of impossible beauty roamed in perfect harmony. There was no fleet defending it, for it was a holy place, beyond the concept of war. On the bridge of the Mnemosyne, a single, tear-like bead of light formed at the tip of the ship's central spire. Eris Thorn closed his eyes, thought of Lena's hands shaping light, of Alara's voice humming a half-remembered tune, and he opened the floodgates. The first wave of pure, concentrated, weaponized grief, the distilled anguish of a species that had been pushed too far, surged forth from the fleet. It was a silent scream that would shatter 1,000,000,000 years of silence, aimed at a world that had never known a single tear. The wave that left the ghost fleet was not made of light or matter. It was a pressure wave of pure qualia, a tsunami of feeling that moved at the speed of thought. It struck the placid atmosphere of Xylos not with a physical impact, but as a psychic contagion. On the surface of the archive world, in a perfectly manicured savanna, a creature of spun glass and light, the last of the ethereal Lyran, had been composing a silent song in the patterns of the wind for 10,000 years. When the wave hit, it was inundated with the raw, jagged memory of a father holding his daughter's lifeless hand in the ruins of a bombed-out city on a world it had never known. The Lyran song shattered into a shriek of alien agony, and its body of light imploded, leaving behind only a fading, mournful chime. Across the planet, the meticulously curated piece was shredded. In crystalline forests, the tranquil, hive-minded Cathar, who had lived in a state of blissful unity for millennia, were suddenly slammed with the chaotic fury of 1,000,000 individual human hatreds. Their perfect psychic latticework of shared consciousness buckled and broke, and they turned on one another in a frenzy of borrowed rage. their crystalline bodies shattering as they fought an enemy that existed only in their new, violated minds. The very planet seemed to rebel against its own perfection. Bioluminescent flora, engineered to pulse in a gentle, rhythmic harmony, began to flash in epileptic, terrified strobes. The seas, once calm and reflective, churned as if boiled from below by a phantom heat. Humanity's grief was a poison for which this perfect world had no immunity. It was a virus of the soul, and Xylos was dying of a broken heart, far across the void, in a place that was not a place. A consciousness known only as the Prime Harmonizer registered the event. It did not perceive space or time as humans did, but as an infinite, interwoven tapestry of mathematical constants and resonant frequencies. The universe, to the Harmonizer, was a single Larfoid equation striving for ultimate simplicity and elegance. The Glyptons were not its authors, but its custodians, its gardeners, pruning away the chaotic variables that threatened the sublime beauty of the final proof. Viridia had been one such variable, a discordant note of chaotic biological emotion. The pruning had been a simple, elegant solution. But this was different, and the death of Xylos did not register as a loss of life or territory. For those were messy, biological concepts. It registered as a fundamental violation of cosmic law. A wave of pure, unstructured, paradoxical data had been introduced into a perfectly ordered system. It was as if someone had scrawled a crude, vulgar joke across the pages of a sacred text, and the Harmonizer experienced the wave not as sadness or anger, but as a profound and offensive logical fallacy. Grief, rage, love, despair, these were irrational numbers, messy and illogical, contaminating the purity of its perception. For the first time in an existence that spanned geologic time, the Prime Harmonizer felt the psychic equivalent of static, of noise. It analyzed the anomaly with cold, detached precision. The signal was complex, layered, and centered on a single, agonizingly loud point of origin, the consciousness of the human, Eris Thorn. It was a feedback loop. The humans were not merely broadcasting their chaos, they were amplifying it, focusing it, weaponizing it. They had turned their greatest flaw, their emotional dissonance, into a weapon that could attack the very fabric of Glypton reality. This was not merely a weed to be pruned. This was a disease, an intellectual contagion that threatened the sanity of the equation itself. The Harmonizer did not decide to retaliate. It decided to sterilize. It initiated a protocol that had not been used in 1 billion years. A solution designed to correct not just a civilization, but a fundamental error in the physical laws of a given sector. It was a response not of war, but of celestial hygiene. Aboard the Mnemosyne, Eris Thorn collapsed. The backlash from the echo chamber was 1,000 times worse than he had imagined. He had been the conduit, and the raw, unfiltered agony of billions had scoured his own consciousness raw. He wasn't just himself anymore. He was a haunted house of fractured memories that were not his own. He felt the phantom sting of a plasma burn on a leg he'd never injured, tasted the bitter ash of a world he'd never seen, and wept for a lover whose name he didn't know. His own grief for Lena and Alara was still there, the cold, hard anchor, but it was now just one voice in a choir of ghosts. He convulsed on the deck of the chamber, his mind a battlefield of other people's wars. Medics rushed to his side, but they could do nothing for a man whose wounds were in the soul. Marshal Rostova watched the feed from Eris's biomonitor, her face an unreadable mask. On the main view screen, Xylos was no longer a jewel, but a swirling vortex of chaotic psychic energy, a wound in the fabric of space. Status report, she ordered, her voice cutting through the hushed tension on the bridge. The target world is neutralized. Marshal, the tactical officer reported, his voice laced with awe and horror. All signs of coordinated activity have ceased. The psychic resonance is off the charts, but it's pure chaos. We broke them. A grim silence settled over the bridge. There were no cheers, no triumphant shouts. They had won, but the victory felt profane. They had committed an act of psychic genocide, and the stain of it was on every one of them. They had looked into the abyss of their own pain and had forced an entire world to look with them. "What is the cost to our own people?" Rostova asked, her gaze flicking to the fleet-wide psychological status report. The officer hesitated. "Widespread, emotional bleed, nightmares, hallucinations. The crews connected to the network are experiencing echoes. We've had to sedate half the personnel on the Sorrowful Blade." Rostova's jaw tightened. The weapon was a double-edged sword, and it was cutting them just as surely as it cut the enemy. "Recall all strike teams," she commanded. "Prepare for a second wave. We hit their primary command nexus next. We don't give them time to—" She was cut off by a sudden, piercing alarm from the long-range sensor station. "Marshal energy reading. Unlike anything on record, it's not a ship. It's a wave. A wavefront. Coming from deep space. It's moving at near-light speed." On the view screen, the image of the ruined Xylos was replaced by a tactical display showing a ripple in space-time, a shimmering, incandescent curtain of light sweeping through the system. It wasn't an attack in any conventional sense. It carried no explosive payload, no kinetic energy. It was simply coming. "Evasive maneuvers," Rostova barked. "Get us out of its path." But it was too late. The wave was too vast, too fast. Aris, now lucid but trembling, pushed himself up, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. He could feel it. It was the antithesis of their weapon. Where they had projected chaos, this was a wave of absolute, terrifying order. "It's not going to destroy us," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's going to fix us." The scout ship Keepsake at the edge of the formation was the first to be touched by the wave. Its comm channel was open, its captain shouting a confused report. "Marshal, the wave is passing through us. There's no damage. All systems are green, but there's a resonance. My crew, their skin." His voice cut out, replaced by a single, serene musical note. On the main screen, the live feed from the Keepsake showed a sight of impossible horror. The crew members were not dying. They were changing. Their flesh flowed like molten wax. Their bones stretched and reformed. Their eyes glazed over, becoming smooth, opalescent spheres. The metal bulkheads of the ship itself began to shimmer, its hard angles softening, its complex machinery melting and merging into a single, seamless, crystalline structure. Within seconds, the ship and its crew were one. The screams, the blood, the frantic chaos of life, all of it was smoothed away, replaced by a silent, beautiful, perfect sculpture of crystal and light that drifted serenely in the void, humming with that single, pure note. It was a statue where a starship had been, a monument to the Glypton philosophy of perfection. The wave continued its inexorable advance, sweeping toward the rest of the ghost fleet. They had brought a scream to a silent universe, and the universe was now responding with a lullaby that would turn them all to glass. Panic erupted on the bridge. "It's going to hit us in 90 seconds. Our weapons have no effect." Rostova stood frozen, watching the crystalline form of the Keepsake glint in the starlight. They had built a weapon to break an enemy's mind, never imagining that the enemy's response would be to erase the very concept of a mind, to rewrite their chaotic biology into the ordered perfection of a stone. Eris staggered to his feet, his eyes burning with a desperate, feverish light. "They're turning us into art," he rasped. "Marshal, we can't run. There's only one way. We have to scream louder." "Scream louder." Rostova's voice was a blade of ice, cutting through the rising panic on the bridge. "Doctor, your weapon just turned one of my ships into a wind chime. Explain yourself, and do it before that wave turns us all into a museum exhibit." Eris stumbled toward the command console, his body a fragile vessel for the storm raging in his mind. He pointed a trembling finger at the approaching wavefront, a shimmering curtain of cosmic order that filled the view screen. "That's not a weapon of destruction," he said, his voice gaining a frantic urgency. "It's a weapon of conversion, a reality-altering field. It's not destroying matter, it's rewriting it according to their principles. It's imposing a new set of physical laws where chaos, entropy, and even biological individuality are impossible. It's turning everything it touches into a perfect, stable, silent state. It is turning us into them." He gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. "But it's a wave. It has a frequency, a resonance. Our weapon, the echo chamber, it operates on a similar principle, just in reverse. We project psychic chaos. If we can match their frequency, we might not be able to stop it, but we might be able to disrupt it, introduce a paradox, create a feedback loop that could shatter it from the inside." A cynical, battle-hardened engineer chief looked up from his station. "You want to fight a tidal wave by shouting at it, Doctor?" "Exactly," Eris yelled, a wild look in his eyes. "But we need everyone to shout. Not just the grief. Everything. Every chaotic, messy, illogical human emotion. Joy, lust, pettiness, ambition, hope, fear. We tried to kill them with our sorrow. Now, we have to kill them with our humanity." Rostova stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. The alternative was a silent, crystalline death. The logic of the desperate was its own kind of reason. "How?" she demanded. The echo chamber was tuned specifically to grief. "How do you retune a weapon of this scale in less than a minute?" "We don't," Eris said, turning to her, his face a mask of terrible resolve. "We overload it. We bypass the filters. We open the floodgates. I need you to give an order. Marshal, an order that goes against every regulation, every instinct you have as a commander. I need you to tell every soul in this fleet to stop being a soldier and to start being a person. Tell them to open their private comms, to broadcast their memories, their dreams, their love letters, their final goodbyes. Tell them to sing, to scream, to curse, to pray. We need to turn this entire fleet into a psychic bonfire of raw, unfiltered life, and I need to be at the center of it." Rostova's expression was stone, but her eyes betrayed the gamble she was about to take. She keyed the fleet-wide channel, her voice ringing out with an authority that defied the encroaching doom. "All hands, this is the Marshal. You are about to receive a command that will make no sense. In 60 seconds, our fleet will be struck by a Glypton conversion wave. We cannot outrun it. We cannot shoot it down. Our only hope is a psychic countercharge. Doctor, Thorn is opening the echo chamber to all frequencies. On my mark, I want you to broadcast. Not your reports, not your battle cries. Broadcast yourselves. Sing your children's lullabies. Recite the poems that make you weep. Confess your secret shames and your proudest moments. Tell the people you love what they mean to you. Let the void hear what it means to be human. Show these silent gods the beautiful, terrible noise we make. Rostova out. A stunned silence followed her transmission. Then, slowly at first, then in a rising crescendo, the comm channels began to fill. A young pilot on the frigate Wanderer began to sing a sea shanty from old Earth, his voice cracking with fear and defiance. The grizzled weapons officer on the Unbroken Vow began to weep as he broadcast a memory of his son's first steps. A chef in the mess hall screamed a recipe for his grandmother's pasta sauce into the void. It was a cacophony, a mad, glorious symphony of life at its most vulnerable and its most defiant. It was the sound of a species refusing to go quietly into the silent night. In the heart of the Minimazani, Eris Thorn became the nexus of it all. He disengaged the emotional dampeners and the psychic filters, and the full, unrestrained torrent of human experience slammed into him. It was no longer just grief. It was everything. He felt the delirious joy of a first kiss from 1,000 different memories, the bitter sting of 1,000 betrayals, the quiet contentment of 1,000 peaceful sunsets. He was a conductor for an orchestra of souls, and the music was tearing him apart. The filaments connecting him to the echo chamber glowed with a white-hot intensity. His own consciousness, his own identity, began to fray, to dissolve into the tidal wave of 1 billion lives. But he held on, his anchor no longer just his loss, but the fierce, desperate love for the very chaos that defined his species. He had to give it a voice. The wave of Glypton order was seconds away, a wall of serene, shimmering light. On the bridge of the Minimazani, Rostova watched, her hand resting on the hilt of her ceremonial sidearm, ready to choose a quick death over a perfect one. The ship's central spire began to pulse, not with the mournful light of grief, but with a chaotic, strobing rainbow of pure, untamed emotion. Eris found the core of the storm within himself. He focused the entire, insane chorus of humanity, the songs, the recipes, the confessions, the laughter, the tears into a single, impossible concept. It was not an attack. It was a question. It was the ultimate paradox, the most human thing of all, an act of love in the face of annihilation. He took the memory of Lena, her smile as she sculpted light, the feeling of her hand in his, and he wrapped it around the agony of Ilara's silence. He wrapped it around the joy and the rage and the hope of the entire fleet, and he screamed it into the void. The two waves met. It was a collision of fundamental principles, of cosmic philosophies. Absolute, unyielding order met absolute, irrational chaos. Silence met noise for a single, terrifying moment. There was nothing. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, a fracture appeared in the Glypton wavefront, a crack of psychic dissonance. The paradox Eris had unleashed the illogical, beautiful, painful fusion of love and loss was a logical impossibility to the Glypton consciousness. It was like dividing by zero. Their wave, their perfect equation, could not compute it. The single musical note that defined their reality began to waver, to go off-key. The crack spider-webbed across the shimmering curtain of light. The perfect, serene wave began to feed back on itself, its own energy turning inward, unable to process the illogical data it had encountered. It began to collapse, not in an explosion, but in an implosion of pure logic. The shimmering light curdled, turning a sickly, discordant color before shattering into 1 billion shards of silent, fading light. The wave was broken. The ghost fleet was still there, its comm channels still a babble of human noise. They were alive, On the floor of the echo chamber, Eris Thorn lay still, smoke curling from the neural filaments attached to his body. His mind was a wasteland, a shoreline scoured by the full tide of the human condition. He had saved them, but he had given his own sanity as the price. As the medics rushed to his side once more, his lips moved, and a single, garbled whisper escaped. It was not a word, but a feeling, an echo of what he had seen in the heart of the Glypton mine as it broke. He had seen the harmonizer. He had felt its ancient, vast, and now wounded consciousness. And in that wound, he had planted a seed of doubt, a seed of fear, a seed of chaos. They had survived the lullaby, but now they had made the silent god angry, and they had shown it how to scream. The aftermath of the broken wave was not victory. It was a ceasefire declared by a bewildered universe. The ghost fleet drifted in a graveyard of shattered light, the echoes of their collective psychic broadcast still whispering through the ship corridors. A profound and unsettling silence replaced the cacophony, leaving a psychic hangover that settled deep in the bones of every crew member. They had stared into the abyss of their own collective soul and used it to bludgeon a god. The experience had left them irrevocably changed. On the bridge of the Mimazani, Marshal Rostova watched the long-range sensors with an eagle's intensity. The Glypton presence hadn't vanished. It had receded, pulled back like a wounded animal, its serene omnipresence now curdled with a note of something alien and new confusion. They had encountered a logical paradox they could not resolve, and the universe's gardeners were, for the first time, hesitating. "Damage reports," Rostova commanded, her voice a low rumble that cut through the exhaustion. "Structural integrity is at 98%. Marshal," the engineering chief reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Life support is stable across the fleet. The wave didn't touch our hulls." "That wasn't the damage I was asking about," she replied, her gaze fixed on the medbay feed. Eris Thorn was in a coma. His brain activity was a chaotic storm, his mind trapped in the feedback loop he had created. He was experiencing a billion lives at once, a man drowning in the ocean of humanity he had weaponized. The medics could do little but stabilize his body and hope his consciousness found its way back from the brink. He was the hero who had saved them, and he was their first and most grievous casualty. But the cost was higher still. The fleet-wide psychological reports were a landscape of trauma. Soldiers trained for the rigors of combat were weeping in the mess halls, haunted by the phantom joys and sorrows of their crewmates. The enforced intimacy of the psychic broadcast had dissolved the barriers between minds, leaving them all psychically scarred and emotionally raw. They were a fleet of ghosts in more than just name. Each sailor now a repository of 1,000 other people's secrets and pains. They had won, but they had lost the simple solitude of the self. "Marshal," the communications officer said, his voice hushed. "We're receiving a transmission, not from the Glyptons. It's human." On the main view screen, a face appeared. It was a man, his features sharp and his eyes burning with an intelligence that bordered on fanaticism. He stood before a backdrop that was not a ship's bridge, but something that looked more like a laboratory or a temple, filled with strange, pulsating organic technology. "Marshal Eva Rostova," the man said, his voice smooth and laced with a condescending pity. "I am Kai, and I represent the Chorus of Emergence. We have been observing your crude but effective confrontation with the Harmonizer. You have succeeded in doing in a day what we have been working towards for a century. You have wounded a god." Rostova's eyes narrowed. "I don't know who you are, But you are in a restricted military channel. Identify yourself and your intentions." Kai smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "Intentions. We are scholars of the inevitable. Martial, futurists. We, like you, recognize the Glyptons as a threat to humanity's chaotic, beautiful potential. But your methods, they are like using a sledgehammer to perform surgery. You weaponize pain. You burn down the library to kill a spider. We offer a more elegant solution, an evolution." He gestured behind him, where glowing pods contained beings suspended in a golden fluid. "The Glyptons seek to impose order on us from the outside. The chorus seeks to cultivate it from within. We are guiding humanity towards its next great leap, a collective consciousness, a voluntary viridia, a state where individuality is not erased, but harmonized. We are becoming what the Glyptons fear most, a force of chaos with a unified, singular purpose." A cold dread trickled down Rostova's spine. This was a different kind of monster, one that wore a human face. "You're a cult," she stated flatly. "We are the future." Kai corrected her gently. "And we are here to offer you a choice. Your weapon, the echo chamber, is a blunt instrument. It is killing its wielder and traumatizing your crews. We can help you refine it, control it. More importantly, we can help Dr. Thorne. The human mind was not meant to contain a multitude, but ours are. We can enter his shattered consciousness, guide him back, and in return, you will share the core schematics of your amplification technology. Together, we can create a symphony of human will, not a scream of agony." The offer was a poisoned chalice. The chorus of emergence represented an insidious threat, a philosophy that would achieve the Glyptons' goal through seduction rather than force. They wanted to turn humanity into a hive mind, to sacrifice the messy glory of the individual for the efficient power of the collective. It was everything Rostova was fighting against, but Eris was dying. Her fleet was breaking under the psychological strain, and the Glyptons were still out there, regrouping, learning from their wound. She was a pragmatist, and the pragmatic choice was the one that kept her people alive to fight another day. "Send a medical team," she ordered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "You will be under armed guard at all times. You will help Dr. Thorne, and if you try anything, I will space you myself." Kai's smile widened. "An excellent choice, Marshal. You will not regret this." The chorus medical ship, a sleek, bioluminescent vessel that looked more like a living creature than a machine, docked with the Mnemosyne. Kai and a small team of his followers, their faces eerily calm and their eyes sharing a subtle, shared focus, were escorted to the med bay. They stood over Eris's comatose form, their hands hovering above his head as they began to hum in a low, resonant harmony. They were not using technology, but a form of controlled, collective telepathy. They were preparing to enter the storm of Eris Thorne's mind. As they worked, the Glyptons responded. A single probe, a crystalline shard the size of a mountain, appeared at the edge of the system. It did not attack. It simply watched, and it began to broadcast a signal. It was not the wave of conversion, nor was it the silence that had preceded it. It was a single, repeating, mathematical sequence. A question. On the bridge, the tactical officer translated the signal. His face went pale. "Marshal, it's learning. The signal. It's modeling our emotional broadcast. It's trying to understand the paradox we threw at it. It's trying to learn how to feel." The cold dread in Rostova's gut solidified into a block of ice. They had not just wounded the god, they had given it a disease. They had infected the Prime Harmonizer with the virus of human emotion. They had taught it how to hurt, and now it was studying its own pain, analyzing it with cold, cosmic intelligence. A god learning to feel rage was a terrifying prospect. A god learning to feel grief. A god who now understood the concept of loss because they had taken its perfect archive world from it was a nightmare beyond comprehension. They had created a vengeful god, one that was now methodically, logically, and without passion, learning how to hate them. And the only man who understood its mind was lying broken in the medbay, his consciousness in the hands of fanatics who believed that the only way to save humanity was to destroy what made them human. The war was no longer about survival. It had become a battle for the soul of two species, and the fate of the galaxy would be decided not on a battlefield of stars, but in the shattered, haunted landscape of a single man's mind. The landscape of Eris Thorn's mind was not a place of thought, but a universe of raw sensation. It was a maelstrom of shattered mirrors, each fragment reflecting a different life, a different memory from the billions of souls he had channeled in his desperate act of defiance. He was a library of 1 billion burning books, each one screaming its story simultaneously. He felt the phantom heat of twin suns on a farming colony he'd never visited, his skin prickling with the memory of a harvest festival. He tasted the acrid smoke of an engine fire in the claustrophobic confines of a freighter, the panic of a crew chief whose name he didn't know flooding his own heart. He experienced the quiet, bone-deep satisfaction of a mathematician solving a century-old proof, the solution unfolding in his consciousness with a beauty that brought tears to his eyes, even as he felt the agonizing pain of a soldier dying in a forgotten skirmish, the shrapnel a ghost in his own flesh, and through it all, a constant, anchoring presence his own grief, the memory of Lena's hands, covered in clay as she laughed in her workshop, and the sound of Alara humming off-key in the garden. These were not just memories anymore. They were the gravitational center of his shattered psyche, a cold, dense star of loss around which the chaotic nebula of 1 billion other lives swirled. It was an existence of unbearable empathy, a crucifixion upon a cross of shared human experience. He was a god of pain, and his throne was a hospital bed. Into this divine chaos flowed the chorus of emergence. Their consciousnesses did not invade, they seeped, like cool, clear water into parched earth. Led by the dispassionate will of Kai, their minds entered the storm not as a force of opposition, but as one of order. They were psychic gardeners in a jungle of agony, and they began their work with serene precision, and their thoughts were like gentle hands, gathering the screaming fragments of memory, sorting the cacophony of emotions into neat, manageable categories. They approached his all-consuming grief for his family not as a sacred wound to be honored, but as a discordant, painful note to be tuned, smoothed and integrated into a grander, more peaceful harmony. "Let go of the pain, Eris," Kai's thought voice whispered, a silken, logical tendril wrapping around the core of his identity. "You are clinging to a ghost. Individuality is a prison of suffering, a solitary confinement of the soul. Your grief is a flaw in the code, a recursive loop of sorrow. Let us harmonize it. Let us resolve the dissonance. Let us make you whole by making you a part of us, a single, perfect voice in the grand composition of humanity, a part of Eris, the part worn raw by the endless friction of other people's lives, craved that peace. It was the promise of an end to suffering, a surrender into a tranquil sea of shared identity where the burden of self would be lifted. He felt the allure of their unity, the quiet strength of their collective mind. But as their influence began to soothe the storm, It also began to erase the details. The specific, off-key note of Alara's humming began to fade, corrected into a perfect pitch. The unique, crooked line of Lena's smile began to straighten into a generic, pleasing curve. They were not healing him, they were editing him. And the flawed, messy, beautiful truth of his love was a masterpiece they sought to sand down into a blank, polished stone. The memory of his daughter's imperfect song became a single, dissonant note of defiance against their flawless harmony. On the bridge of the Minimazani, the Glypton probe began its true and terrible work. The crystalline mountain did not fire a weapon of matter or energy. Instead, it pulsed with a deep, subsonic hum, broadcasting a new kind of wave, a psychic field of pure, unassailable logic aimed directly at the minds of the fleet. It was the ultimate weapon of a god that had dissected its own newfound pain and weaponized the cold, hard truth it had discovered. The wave was not grief. It was the mathematical proof of grief's absolute futility. It flooded the minds of the human crew with a chilling, incontrovertible certainty of their own cosmic insignificance. It was not an argument. It was a direct experience. In a single, terrifying instant of clarity, each crew member was shown the birth and the inevitable heat death of the universe. They were made to feel the cold, hard numbers that governed their fleeting biological existence, the absolute, statistical irrelevance of their love, their rage, their sacrifice in the face of galactic timelines. Their passions were revealed to be mere chemical reactions in a temporary biological machine. Their histories were a flicker of static in an eternity of silence. Hope was not a virtue, it was a rounding error in the grand, pitiless equation of existence. It was a weapon of absolute despair. And because it was based on truth, it was flawless. Across the fleet, the psychic bonfire of human defiance was instantly extinguished. The pilot who had been singing sea shanties fell silent, his hands dropping from the controls as his mind was overwhelmed by the sheer, logical pointlessness of his own struggle. The weapons officer who had wept for his son now stared blankly at the tactical display, his personal tragedy dwarfed and rendered meaningless by the cosmic certainty that all things, his son, himself, his species, his galaxy, would end in cold, undifferentiated dust. The will to fight, to live, to even be, evaporated. Rostova felt it like a physical blow, a pressure in her skull that squeezed out all emotion and replaced it with cold, hard fact. She was a pragmatist, a woman who lived by calculated realities, and this weapon spoke her language. It showed her, with undeniable proof, that her every command, every sacrifice, every hard-won victory was a meaningless gesture in an indifferent void. Her will, the iron core of her being, was revealed to be a mere neurological illusion. She gripped the arms of her command chair, her knuckles white, her breath catching in her throat as she fought a war not against an enemy fleet, but against the very foundation of reality. She was fighting a war against the truth, and she was losing. Within Eris's mind, the wave of Glypton despair felt like the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trench, a force that could extinguish the light of any soul. It was the ultimate validation of everything the chorus was telling him. Kai's psychic voice was serene, triumphant. You see, Eris, this is the end state of individualism, despair, isolation, the cold prison of a singular, meaningless existence. Only in the collective can meaning be forged. Only together can we build a fortress of shared purpose against the cold logic of the void. Cease your struggle, join us, be saved. The twin pressures, the seductive harmonious peace of the chorus and the crushing, logical despair of the Glyptons brought Eris to the precipice of annihilation. He was about to be either absorbed into the hive mind or logically erased by the cosmic truth. He was a paradox caught between two opposing forms of perfection. But in that final, infinitesimal moment, at the nexus of absolute chaos and absolute order, he found a third path. He finally understood. He had been fighting the wrong war. He had tried to defeat silence with noise, order with chaos. But the answer was not victory. It was synthesis. The Glyptons were wrong because their perfect logic failed to account for the beautiful, defiant irrationality of hope. The chorus was wrong because their perfect harmony sought to eliminate the dissonant, individual notes that created the very music of life. The flaw was not in the chaos or the order, but in the belief that one must vanquish the other with a final, desperate act of will that was entirely his own. He reached for the core of his being, the love for his lost family, and he did not use it as an anchor against the storm. He used it as a seed. He stopped fighting the billion minds within him and instead began to listen, to understand. He embraced the cacophony not as a burden, but as an orchestra, and he, the grieving scientist, the broken man, became its conductor. Eris Thorne's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the eyes of one man. They swirled with the captured light of a billion souls, a living constellation of consciousnesses looking out from a single face. He sat up, the neural filaments connecting him to the echo chamber detaching from his body with a soft, sighing hiss. Kai and the other chorus members recoiled as if burned, their serene expressions shattering into disbelief and fear. The man before them was no longer a man. He was a multitude. He was humanity. "Your harmony is a cage," Eris said, and his voice was a legion, a chorus of every soul he now carried, speaking in a unified, resonant tone. "And your logic," he continued, his swirling gaze turning to the view screen and the ominous Glypton probe, "is incomplete." With a simple gesture, a thought made manifest, he retook command of the echo chamber, but he did not project a weaponized scream of grief. He projected a composition. He took the Glypton's wave of perfect and cold despair and gently wove into it the illogical, defiant warmth of the pilot's half-forgotten sea shanty. He took the mathematical certainty of universal heat death and laid it alongside the vibrant, illogical memory of a father's boundless love for his son. He broadcast not a paradox to break their minds, but a synthesis to complete them. He sent them art. He sent them a story. A song of a universe where grief is the unavoidable price of profound love, where meaning is not a universal constant to be discovered, but something created in small, defiant acts of hope against a backdrop of indifference. He showed them that the silence is made beautiful only by the memory of the song that came before it. He did not attack the prime harmonizer's logic. He offered it the other half of the equation. The crushing wave of despair ceased. On the bridge, the crew of the Mnemosyne took a collective and shuddering breath as if waking from a nightmare. The Glypton probe hung in the void, silent and motionless. It had been given a concept it could not categorize, refute, or destroy a truth that was simultaneously logical and emotional. To erase the message would be an illogical act, proving the message's central point that some things, when erased, leave an echo that fundamentally changes the silence that remains. After a long, profound moment that stretched into an eternity, the crystalline shard turned, without a sound, without a trace of energy. It vanished into the deep black of space. It was not a retreat, it was a departure, a pilgrimage, perhaps, to contemplate an impossible new truth that had been added to its perfect and cosmic equation. The war was over. Eris, now something more and less than human, stood and faced Marshal Rostova, his legion eyes filled with a vast and terrible empathy. "We are all connected now. Marshal," his chorus of voices said gently, and the fleet heard everything. "They are no longer just your soldiers. They are a family, bound by the shared scars of 1,000,000,000 lives." Rostova looked out at her crew. They were slowly coming back to themselves, no longer broken by despair, but filled with a quiet, unshakable, shared understanding. They had seen the worst of themselves and the best of each other. They had survived. Humanity had survived, but they were not the same. They had stared into the void and had taught it their name. They had faced two opposing forms of perfection and had chosen, defiantly, their own beautiful, messy, glorious imperfection. The ghost fleet, now truly a fleet of souls, turned for home, leaving the silence of the void no longer empty, but filled with the lingering, unerasable echo of a human song.